All right. Good morning. We've been in this series in the book of Revelation now. This is teaching number 18. I want to read our text this morning, and then we've got some work to do, and then we need to make some political statements. Okay. So that's the game plan for today. I know and these days it's like that's why we're here. All right. So let's go ahead and jump in. This is Revelation chapter 22. So for those that have read the book of Revelation, you know we're in the final chapter of Revelation. So this is chapter 22, verse 1. I want to read this to you, but then I need to give you some historical backdrop to what John is saying here, because it's going to give you it's going to give you layers of power when you understand the backdrop of these words, because they're not only profound, but when you understand the world in which John is writing, it is crucial to understand when he talks about healing here, what exactly he's talking about. So let's read this. This is Revelation chapter 22, verse 1. Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne room of God and of the Lamb, through the middle of the street of the city. On either side of the river is the tree of life, which its 12 kinds of fruit, producing its fruit each month. And here it is. And the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. Nothing accursed will be found there anymore, but the throne of God and the Lamb will be in it, and his servants will worship him. They will see his face, and his name will be on their foreheads. And the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. If John was saying anything to us, he's saying in the final chapter of the book of Revelation that he sees a new city. And this new city is a space, a gathering of nations, plural. And this new city is a space where water, the river of life, as he calls it, runs freely through the middle of the city. It is also a place where the tree of life, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, anyone who knows anything about Hebrew scripture knows he's throwing back to Genesis chapter 3. So John, it's brilliant. As a good Hebrew, John, as a good Jewish person, John is going all the way back to the beginning. And isn't it interesting? Now, this book barely made the canon for many reasons. Most of you now, after we've read through it, realize it probably shouldn't have made the canon. But it barely made the canon, and perhaps one of the reasons it made the canon is because of how beautifully John ends his book. Because he goes all the way back to the beginning. And it's in Genesis 3 where many subscribe to that being the location where the wheels kind of start coming off of things. And John goes all the way back there and he says, I see a new city. And this new city, there is a tree of life. There is water of life. And it flows freely. And then the tree of life produces fruit that is enough to heal the nations. Now, to get at this, particularly because this is the second to last teaching, I want to go back to teaching 2 for us. When we started the series, I gave you some historical context about the book of Revelation because we're trying to read it as a historical and literary approach to Revelation. So I want to go back and give you some history here for just a second. And I want you to remember how all of this got started. Now, to do that, I need to give you a list of the Caesars. So check out these Caesars. You'll see these. Now, most of you are probably familiar with this, but you need to understand exactly when this book is written and exactly what is happening here. But this list of Caesars here, I want you to see this because you have Julius Caesar, who's not on there. He was the first one, so he's like the godfather of them all. You know what I'm talking about? Most of you are familiar with Julius Caesar. You've seen statues of Julius Caesar. You're like, Julius Caesar, yep, I know Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar adopted a son named Octavian. Octavian's name was later changed to Augustus. You're familiar with this, right? So Augustus was really the first ruler. He was the first ruler of the Roman Empire from 27 BCE to 14 CE. Then you had Tiberius, 14 to 37 CE. Then Caligula. Then Claudius. Then Nero. Now, pause here. You remember what John did when he started talking about the beast? John said one of the heads of the beast had a numeric value of his name. You remember the numeric value? 666. That number is the numeric value of Nero. So, Nero, 54 to 68 CE. And then you had Vespasian. Well, you had three more. And by the way, that's my favorite, the three more, because it only lasted for a year, and some of them, most historians don't even name them. They're like, yeah, then there was three, all right? It'd be really bad if you were one of those three, right? Like, you don't get any glory. So then there were one of the three who served for less than a year, all right? Then you had Vespasian from 69 to 69 CE, and then Titus from 79 to 81 CE, and then Domitian, which is when this writing takes place, from 81 to 96 CE. Now, keep that screen up for just a minute because I want to show you when the Roman-Jewish War takes place and who's leading here. So hold that screen. Domitian, who is the last ruler, was the son of Vespasian, who is between, Titus is in between. And the younger brother, Domitian was, to General Titus, who at the time wasn't an emperor, he was a general. And it was Titus, right there, who led the first Jewish-Roman war. And for those that are unfamiliar, Roman forces broke through the Jewish defenses and set ablaze the city of Jerusalem and destroyed the sacred temple in 70 CE. Now the question is, how did Titus do this? Titus surrounded the city in what they call a rampart, a wall. And he surrounded the city with a legion of Roman soldiers, around 5,000. They threw up this wall and then surrounded the city 3 days. And what they did strategically is as they surrounded the city, they cut off the water and food supply. Those who tried to escape were crucified. Famine was so bad when they cut off the water and food supply that some historians claim mothers tried to eat the flesh of their own children. 6 months later, Titus captured the city and decided to level it. I want to give you some details of what took place, because oftentimes we'll read the book of Revelation, and if you have like a futurist sense, you're just like, oh, John, this is so encouraging. Thank you. Life is hard, but then we're going to go to heaven when we die, and John is giving us a picture of heaven. That's a futurist left behind reading. If it brings you hope, great. But to read Revelation 21 and 22 without knowing anything about this would be to miss the power of the words that he's using. When John says, I saw a new city, I want you to understand that this was a very much so this world new city. John is talking about, dreaming about a new city because he knows what happened to his old city. He knows how devastating the Roman-Jewish war actually was. And for many of us, we don't have the history. So when we read things about the tree of life in a new city that brings healing to the nations. We pass up that word healing like, well, that's nice. In heaven, we'll all experience some healing, right? No. When John talks about a new city and healing, you better believe it had personal, deep implications of his own wounds that needed healing. This is a man who's lost people he's loved. This is a man who's been exiled because of his own resistance to empire. This is a man who's writing 7 churches whom have lost the sacred space where their God dwelt. This is a man who an empire came in, and an emperor named Domitian, who is an authoritarian dictator, who came in, put his name on everything, and then demolished their city, and then burnt their temple to the ground. So when John writes a book like Revelation, when he's unveiling, revealing the empire, man, this has really, really personal, deep hurts and pains and wounds. And so I want to give you a little bit more detail because some of you are familiar with the Roman-Jewish War, but maybe you don't know exactly what happened. The city of Jerusalem, after it was surrounded by the Romans, their city cut off the water and food supply. Those who tried to escape were crucified. But then, once Titus came in and captured the city, he leveled it. The city of Jerusalem was looted. Many residents were killed. Those that weren't were taken into slavery. Much of the city was leveled with only 3 towers left remaining. And the Romans, it says, left these 3 towers as a monument to their own victory. They left them there to show the people of Jerusalem that you don't mess with empire. It was like statues left over to just remind them of who's actually in control. There are some estimates. Now, these are coming from Jewish historians, mainly Josephus, and I must say scholarship sometimes worry about Josephus's words because he does tend to stretch some things. But there are some estimates that over 1.1 million Jews died during the Roman-Jewish War. There are some estimates that 97,000 were enslaved during the Roman-Jewish War. They looted the temple itself. They went in before burning it down, and they took the golden lampstands, tables, sacred vessels, priestly garments, and the spices that are used. And the temple treasures that they took, they decided to put in a parade, a triumphal procession in the middle of the summer of 71 CE, alongside hundreds of chained Jewish prisoners. And they paraded all of that through the city as a demonstration that you don't mess with the empire. So when John writes about the healing of the nations, when John talks about a new city, and he talks about healing in that new city, yeah, there were like deep, deep cuts. What remains of the temple is what we call the Wailing Wall or the Western Wall. You've probably heard of this. And this is all they have. And these people have lost moms and dads and sons and daughters. And so when John gives us a vision about a new Jerusalem, this is about here and now. This is a this-worldly vision. It is an affirmation that the divine has not gone down with the temple. That actually the divine is formless and the divine is even outside of the temple. And so when John talks about a new Jerusalem, he's given his people some sense of hope as they stand in what is left of the city they've known. Because this is what happens with empires. Inevitably, what begins to happen as you begin to see over and over again that everything they promise, what happened to the golden age that Domitian promised, because it didn't look so golden for the city of Jerusalem. And this is how it works. When people say golden age, when they talk about how the world's going to be better than it's ever been before, I need to be very clear. Empires have been making promises like that for years. And what I need you to know is that it actually is true, but only for a select few amount of people. Because what you have are those that are on the edges, like the city of Jerusalem, that actually end up dealing with the repercussions of people that are making claims about how great the world is going to be, about how amazing their empire actually is. And they will make all kinds of claims about how great things are going, but here's what you need to know. Don't look at the top 1%. Because if you do, it will appear as if what they're saying is true. What John is saying is, no. I need you to look to the corner of the empire. Because you can judge a nation not by how many billionaires it has. You can judge a nation fairly by looking at how they take care of their poorest citizens. And this is what John is shedding a light on. So when he writes these words, he's writing them in the rubble of a destroyed city. He's writing them in a city that is sitting in ruins. And he's saying, I'm going to stand in the ruins of Jerusalem, in the heart of a temple that has gone down, and I'm going to make a declaration. The divine is here. The divine is present. And I see restoration, renewal, and redemption for our city. I see healing. I see a new Jerusalem. This is my prayer for our country. A part of what my longing is, perhaps yours. A part of what my hope is, and perhaps yours. Part of what my prayer is that somehow in everything that we're walking through as a nation, that somehow what is happening is an unveiling, an apocalypse, a revealing, where everything that's down below is being moved to the surface. And when I say that, I mean all the dark shadows are all being brought up. And as hard as it is to look at, as hard as it is to see, here's the word. I do think that maybe, just maybe, and here's my hope, that it's detrimental for us to see all of this, because perhaps it is a part of the healing process. That you and I know that we're never going to actually be healed if we don't start acknowledging some of these things that have been sitting in the shadows of our American culture for years. And this is why it breaks our hearts. And this is the phrase you hear. My heart breaks when I see certain things. Yes, I know. And this is why sometimes you look at things and you're like, my God, I didn't even know that was a thing. Yeah. But how do we ever heal from something if we never even acknowledge that something? And so we need to see it, and we need to start acknowledging that this is a reality. And it's also true for you, right? You know this. If you want to heal from something in your life, you can't keep pretending it's not there. No, I come from a family of people that one of their favorite things to do is something will happen in a family, and they'll go, let me get this, just put this right under here. And then they'll just stick it right here, and they're walking like, hey. Everybody smile, say cheese. And I think for years, our American culture has been like that. We're just like looking at the world going, we got it going on over here. When yet everyone who lives over here is like, yeah, it's not as good as you think it is. Yeah, because we're family. And you've been around the family long enough to know there's been a lot of things swept under the rug. There's a lot of things we're trying to hide that we don't want to deal with. And we've been asking all of our family to gather together to come to therapy. You know what I'm talking about? Like we all need to go to therapy, but half the family's like, why would I need to go to therapy? The very person who says, why do I need to go to therapy, is the first person who needs to be in therapy. Why do I need to go? I don't have a problem. Yeah, that's why you need to go. Because you don't have a problem. And part of the thing is, if you don't have a problem, it's perhaps because you're not awake. You're unconscious to the reality that there are lots of problems. And the way that we deal with these problems is not by ignoring them. It's pressing into them. Yeah, it's stepping into that heartache, that pain, that conflict, and saying, what's in here? It's listening to it. What do we need to see? What do we need to acknowledge? How do we need to begin healing? Now, I want to get at a couple things here because John gives us two images. He gives us the image of the tree of life and the river of life. Now, the tree of life is a reference back to Adam and Eve, where they believed the lie that they were something other than made in the image of God, the lie that they were inherently separated from the divine. So I do think there's profound imagery here in this apocalyptic literature. This is a symbol of sorts of how the new city is recovering their original goodness in the original goodness of all creation. These people in the new city are no longer believing the lie that they are anything other than made in the image of God. John sees a city where there is a seamless oneness to all things. But I also think there's a real world interpretation to this imagery that John gives us of a river of life and a tree of life. And I think it's something like this. There is an abundance of life-giving water and food that is no longer being compiled, restricted, or hoarded, and there is no more scarcity. So when John gives us an image of a tree of life and water that flows freely through the city, I think he's getting at something deeply worldly, deeply earthly, that has roots in the ground. And it's something like this. We just came out of an empire that hoarded, stockpiled, protected, and cut off supplies when there was more than enough to take care of its citizens. John is giving a slow critique by saying, in the New Jerusalem, there will be no fighting and hard access to clean drinking water. It will just run freely through the city. Unpolluted, no one stopping up the flow at its top, no one trying to somehow build aqueducts like the Romans did to funnel it down into places so it can go into the top 1%'s house. No, it will just run freely. And here's the thing, whether you're in the top 1% or at the very bottom of the income, anybody can come to the water and drink freely. Yes, you know what this is. This is called John's way of critiquing economic injustice in the Roman Empire. Now, I want to say a couple things about this because I do believe that as John critiques the Roman Empire, the world in front of the text, which is our world, there's so much to say about how the Romans ran their empire and about how America runs its empire. And so I'd like to offer up a couple thoughts to us in light of this quote. Just this week, I read headlines. I watch news like you people do. And I saw an article that came out that I thought was real interesting. And so I'd just like to give you the quote that the President of the United States of America said. He said, quote, "We are purging the federal government of, quote, woke initiatives." And so he gave a list of words that are to be limited and or avoided and no longer used, one of which is women. As in, we no longer can say women. Now that should create a head turn? Because if the word women or woman is a woke term, I'm slightly confused. Because I think that's a human term. Right? Now, he went on to propose the Republican-led federal budget. But here's what I want you to understand. He wraps it all up in this idea that he's trying to cut out the excess. But when you look at that word excess, it sure looks a lot like poor people. So I want to just lean into this for just a minute, because what they call the federal budget, I would call the immoral federal budget. And I want to tell you this, just so we're clear. The top 1% of the wealthiest people in the world have more wealth than the bottom 95% of the global population. I want to repeat that, because that's not just America, that's the world. The top 1% of the wealthiest people in the world have more wealth than the bottom 95% of the global population. They hold, the top 1%, 43% of the global financial assets of the entire world. They hold 43%, nearly half of the financial assets of the entire world. And this Republican-led immoral federal budget is working to cut programs that they call excess. And what I want to say is, what they call excess is actually cutting programs designed intentionally to help low-income Americans. Because for some reason, it's excess and wasted spending if it's helping anyone who doesn't look like them. So there's a small percentage in a small club who sit at the very top, and they want to cut excess. But much of that excess is all about people who are on the complete opposite extreme of them when it comes to the economy. And so you cut things without even thinking about it, without even knowing anything about it, and probably without even being able to spell it. You cut things like USAID. And there are people in the world who've been on the ground, their feet on the ground, and we've had someone that's a part of that organization who lost their job there too, knowing good and well how good of an organization it is and what they're doing in the world. But to someone who's sitting at the very top, not necessary, cut it. Yeah. And I would just propose to those that are sitting in Congress making all these cuts that are affecting low-income Americans, it is interesting that you keep telling us that you don't have money, that you're in debt, to which I want to pause and say, if you're in debt, it's because your leadership, who has been in office before, didn't do anything about it the first time. But now it's back, and we've been dealing with all these leaders and all of these presidents, and what I want to say is, maybe one way to get out of the debt is not starting with low-income Americans, but starting with your federal budget of how much money you keep giving to Israel to kill Gaza children. Because America is the largest arms dealer in the history of the world. In America alone, the United States of America made $20 billion in selling weapons to Israel to be used in Gaza. But yet, we're going to need to cut Medicare. We just don't really have money for it. We need to kind of look at Social Security too, because these older folks, I mean, let's just be honest, they're going to be gone anyways. So let's trick. I know some of you are like, what? Most of you know this, but again, here's what I'm doing. I want to pull it up. I want to pull it all up, and I want us to just look at it. because we're never going to heal if we don't start looking at this stuff. And we can pretend it's not happening, and we can go on about our lives, and we can, buy our cars and our homes and eat our nice food and be like, well, hopefully it gets better. We could do that. That's fine. No judgment. I'm just saying, I don't know about you, but I'm already 43 years into this thing. Maybe I've got another 40, 43, maybe 50. It sure would be cool to do something with the time we have. Instead of repeating our cycles and our patterns, what if we actually kind of work to try to heal some of those patterns? And maybe we left a better world for the people coming behind us. It'd be nice. Some of you having kids, you're like, well, that'd be nice, wouldn't it? Yeah, I think it's possible. I think that's what John is getting at. But I just want to be clear about something. The President of the United States hired, well, first of all, let's back it up. The richest man in the world paid to get someone in the office, which you can do. That's legal in America. So you can give $250 million to pay to get someone in the office. And then when that someone gets in the office, that someone says, I'll get you right back, because it's a quid pro quo. So I'm going to create a position, be my best friend. Come on in. I'm going to give you an office. And then I'm going to let a man who's in touch with America, because he's the richest man in the world, I'm going to let that guy decide what excess is. And so he starts making cuts. And it's interesting, really telling, that he starts with low-income America, with those that are on the edges and the margins. You know what would be great is if he started right in the house he was in, the White House. He said, well, let's talk here. Let's start here. Is all of this stuff necessary? Yeah, I know. When you start talking about cuts, have any of you ever worked through your own personal budget before? I know. Have you ever sat down with someone you love and you start looking at your budget? God, Katie and I, we have to do this occasionally, time and time again. It's a part of the process. Because what will happen is we'll do the thing, and then we're rolling, and then inevitably the wheels start coming off of the budget, and then we're like, it's time to have a meeting. You know what I'm talking about? And then you meet again, and then you sit there in that meeting, you're like, okay, so what's going on? We got to figure out what's going on. So you lay out the whole budget. You know what I'm talking about? And then Katie will come to me, and it's really interesting. You sit down and you try to, back in the day, it's called balancing the checkbook. Do you remember that? You used to have some of you kids don't know this, but it's called paper checks. And you would write the amount, and I remember at school, they would teach us how to write a check, because I didn't know. It's like, how do you write a check? You had to write a check. $250 line. Was that not? That was my favorite part. I was like, what? Real long line, like. And then for some reason I put 00 at the end, like 0. I don't know. Anyways, but on top of the checkbook, it was, you would literally write with a pen everything you spent money on that day. How weird! I'm thinking about what we did. God, we're so old in here. Like telling our kids, like, no, you understand, I had a checkbook that had just writings all in it, and you would open it up, and it's like, look at what Tuesday was. $3.99 Taco Bell. So, you would just go through the list. Everything you see on your bank statements now, people used to manually write that, like, out on the deal. And so now, by the way, when it goes out of sight, how easy is it? It's like back in the day, there was something to say, because you could look at it and be like, I can tell you exactly where my budget's going. I tell you exactly where money's going. But then now that it's out of sight, and that's the beauty of people that like lend credit cards, because they know. And it's easier. It's real easy now that no one even handles cash. Have you ever noticed how it works now? It's just real nice. And now I not only not handle cash, I don't handle anything. Like I just go into Publix. I never carry a wallet. You'll never see me with a wallet. I couldn't tell you where my wallet is. I actually know where it is right this second, but usually I don't. And the only reason I know where it is now is because someone gave some cash for something for me, and I kept it in my thing. And that's the only reason I know. But that said, I don't even usually know where it's at. Every time we go out, Katie's like, do you have your wallet? I was like, what? Why would I have my wallet? I don't know where it is. Everything I do now, I have my wallet on my Apple phone. So I just go pay. I go into Publix and I double click. Y'all know what Apple Pay is? You just double click. God, it's so good. It's just like, oh, you want to buy that? Yeah, no worries. Like I don't have to see it. I don't want to see it. I don't want to hear about it. Just click. But here's the thing. Somebody's got to reconcile it. And so even around Vinings Lake, we have a budget. and somebody's got to reconcile it. So guess what? We have board. We have people. We meet together. We have a guy named Mick who runs all of our finances around here. Guess what? He calls me every month. Pastor, we need to talk. You know what I'm talking about? Line items. Like we go through our entire team. If they're buying donuts for the students on Sunday mornings, check it out. We're going to need to line item that, right? So you know how it is. Katie and I, what's that happen with us? And we'll go through, and every now and then it starts getting off the rails. And then inevitably, though, I always think it's interesting because if you've ever had a discussion, now if you live by yourself, you probably still have this internal battle. But when you have like a spouse or a partner, it is interesting because when you get into balancing the budget, inevitably you both will come with the things that you're wasting money on. And here's fascinating thought. Try running this test. Everything I found that we were wasting were things she was purchasing. Do you know what I'm talking about? And then everything she found were things I was purchasing. Do you know what I'm talking about? Isn't that interesting how that works, right? And so she would say things like, hey, just, that's how it is too. It's just like, you know what I'm talking about? Like, and I don't even know what that means, but it's kind of like, I'm about to hurt you. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like, but it is like, hey, just a heads up, like, if we need to get this budget down, there's just a couple things that we need to talk about. One is, I just noticed, just throwing this out here, but I just noticed, X amount of dollars were spent in golf. And of course, you immediately go into the defense. You're like, well, it's also called therapy. And you start twisting it, you know what I mean? Like, you understand it's vital for my mental health. So, and it is. No one's creating lies here. And if you don't believe me, take away golf and watch what happens to me. Yeah, I got to get outside. I got to have a beer with my guys. I got to sit out there and we got to talk junk and do our thing. That's what we do, right? Like, I'm a human, by the way. You're a pastor. Don't you just sit inside your office and write sermons all day? Usually, but on Fridays, I go outside and cuss with the regulars. You know what I'm talking about? Just trying to be all things to all people, all right? But then I'll look at the budget and go, oh, that's interesting. Because I don't know. It's just, what is this Target purchase? And do we need more shoes? Like, is that something, like, is that like on the scale of, like, where are we at necessity wise? Like, is that, yeah, you know how it is. And then, yeah. Solid. For those listening online, didn't hear it, my wife just yelled out, it's for my mental health. All right. Yeah. So I say all this to just say to you, yeah, that's how it works. All I'm saying is, isn't it interesting? If that works for us, then so it is for the collective. And so if you bring in the world's richest man, and you bring him in, what's he going to do? Of course he's going to start down here. Bill Gates was interviewed on Stephen Colbert this week. And he said, quote, "The picture of the world's richest man killing the world's poorest is not a pretty one," unquote. It was the great prophet Bernie Sanders who said this. In my view, you judge a country not by the number of millionaires or billionaires it produces, but how well it treats the most vulnerable people among them. But of course, any talk of speaking up for the poor, the vulnerable, the immigrant, the hungry, the oppressed, those on the edges, any talk of that for MAGA crowd is what they call, quote, woke, unquote. And what I want to say about that particular phrase is, I'm not real sure what you mean by it, but I will say this. A picture is worth 1,000 words. So if you keep saying taking care of the poor, the vulnerable, the immigrant, and the hungry is woke, then maybe you're saying something about yourself. And maybe what you're saying is this. Maybe the truth of the matter is, it's not that taking care of the poor is woke. It's actually called Christian. It's actually basic level 101 Old Testament, New Testament gospel. So you can pretend it's something, but just let's be clear on our rhetoric here. If you do think that is woke, I don't know how to share this with you, but man, you're going to call Jesus a communist. Because, my God, he gave his life for the poor, the vulnerable, the immigrant, the hungry, and the oppressed. And I think that word you keep using, that word of being woke, says so much, perhaps, about the fact that not that taking care of the poor is woke, but it's only woke to those who are asleep. And so part of the reason that maybe you see an act of taking care of an immigrant or a vulnerable person, or people being concerned about our money that we're working hard for, because here's the thing, I don't think any billionaire should be telling people how to cut budgets until they start paying taxes themselves. All right? And it says something about the economic injustice when I paid taxes this week and I paid more than the richest man in the world did. Now, you can talk all day long, well, he's just clever and smart and knows how to get out of taxes. Okay, you could also just call it robbery. And what I'm trying to say to you is that speaking up for the poor, the vulnerable, the immigrant, the hungry, and the oppressed, and those on the edges is central. It's central to everything the prophets taught in the Old Testament, all the way through the Gospels, all the way up to the book of Revelation. And it is not that Jesus is woke, it is that you are unconscious. And you are unconscious to who you are, and you are unconscious to who Christ is, and you are unconscious to what love has called us into in this moment. And to be clear, that love looks like speaking up for and leveraging our privilege and platform for the vulnerable, the immigrant, the hungry, the oppressed, and the poor around us. So when John talks about a river that flows freely, I do believe he's saying no more hoarding, no more stockpiling, no more separation of some 1% that owns 43% of the river, but it flows freely for all to partake in the new city. And I also think there are metaphorical implications as well. Maybe John, as a good Jewish person, is giving a head nod to Amos chapter 5, verse 23, when Amos says, "Let justice roll down like water and righteousness like an ever-flowing river." And may we as a collective here work to clean out the pollution that has been caused in this river. And may we keep it from being stopped up. And may it flow freely to everyone. And so, let's land this here, okay? You guys have been great. Thanks for leaning in. I can't help but to think about this image, river of life, tree of life, and not think about this phrase he uses, the leaves from the tree are for the healing of the nations. Because for a futurist who read this, that wouldn't make any sense. Wait, heaven's a perfect place. There's no pain, mourning, sorrow, da-da-da-da. So it's heaven, right? Interesting that if you see this as a picture of heaven, then there's still some reconciliation in heaven. There's still some healing that has to happen in heaven. It's almost as if John is just saying people aren't instantly perfected. That's unrealistic. John isn't giving us an unrealistic picture here. He's saying the suffering and the mourning might be gone, but yet there still needs to be some healing. And I think what he's getting at here is the hint of this word healing comes from this word salve. Salve means healing ointment. To be a part of salvation is to be a part of healing in the world. of bringing what is torn and infected among us back into health and right relationship. So when you hear the church or Jesus or the prophets talk about salvation, that first word, salve, is key for us. Because salvation ultimately is not me trying to get you to say some magical prayer so you can go to heaven when you die. It's absurd. No. Salvation is salve. It is a healing ointment. It is you and I doing our work in the world, trying to provide some sense of healing for those who've been wounded. And that's what we do here at Vinings Lake. That's all I try to do on Sunday mornings. When I stand up here to teach, I just want to offer you some healing ointment. Because I know there's a lot of relational wounds in here. I know there are many of you who've had some fractured relationships in this season of your life. And I see as an image that John is giving us of people that no longer make excuses. It's an image of a city where the oppressor has been so infected by love that their ego has actually melted. And that there's actually a time in the new city where they work to make things right. Now, I know that can seem like such a far out image for us, but take your worst oppressor and imagine them being so restored and so transformed that they spend their time working to heal the ways in which they've wounded you. Imagine that. Imagine that. Now, don't mishear me. I do not believe healing looks like black people meeting racists in the middle. I hear people say that all the time, especially MAGA crowd. Well, if you're all inclusive, they pick on people because they're inclusive. They're like all inclusive, and I just want to say, let me be clear about inclusion. When we say inclusion, I am not saying that I expect a woman to meet a misogynist halfway. No, that's called spiritual abuse. And I wouldn't do that in any other marriage. I wouldn't offer you that if your husband or your spouse or your partner was beating you. I wouldn't say, look, you're just going to need to meet him halfway. No, that's abuse. I would say run as far as you can. Protect yourself. And so when I talk about healing, when John's in here talking about healing, the understanding that I get is not black people meeting racists in the middle. It's not women meeting misogynists in the middle. It's not queer people meeting homophobes in the middle. No. It's those who have oppressed and those who have kicked and punched down are the very ones who actually take the initiative and spend their lives trying to make right the wrongs they've done in the world. And this isn't easy work. It's hard work. And it takes a particular disposition to do that type of work. You have to, in some ways, push the ego aside and see all the ways in which you've caused wounds and hurts and pains. And then you work to rectify and reconcile that relationship. And so I understand why there's fractured relationships. Many of you have walked away from your families to protect your own self. I'm reminded of what James Baldwin said when he said, we can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right to exist. And so I say to you, the healing I see in this moment, the salve, the ointment, hasn't only been used on the oppressor, but it's brought from the oppressor, where they recognize the wrongs they've done, and they've moved from dominance to surrender and submission and repentance and restoration, and then use their lives in attempts to honor those they've hurt. And they no longer deflect. but they own it. I want to just read this to you in closing. Share one thing and we're out of here. We're actually okay on time, but it looks a little later because we went a little longer, so don't hold it against me. You know what I mean? So you get out here and be like, he went long today. I actually didn't. Just want to be clear. I just share this and we're done. I recently was in a conversation with a MAGA person. I don't do that a lot because I don't really have the energy and capacity to do it, to be honest with you. Steward your own energies, do your thing, but I just don't have time much for it. I choosing not to have time. I don't want to spend my time doing that. But I was someone that I was like, oh, I respect this individual to a degree. I actually lost a lot of respect for him, but I was like, well, have a conversation with him. And it's interesting as I was talking to this individual, every time I would bring up something, it was always interesting, they would deflect. You know what I'm talking about? So they would say things like, oh, yeah, I see that. But listen, the other side, even worse. You ever heard this before? So you'll bring up something like economic injustice, like, well, let's talk about such as, so they'll bring up something, but then they always go to the other side. They're kind of the bothism, you know what I mean? Like the both sides, like they play that card every time. And it's such an easy card. MAGA's got it in their deal. They know how to run it. And so I thought, how do we talk about that? How do you help someone see something when they just keep deflecting? And then I got to thinking about, why do they keep deflecting? Why do they keep trying to point out the other people's sides when I never even brought up that. I'm bringing up something like, hey, here's a question. How do you feel about this? They're like, well, the left does that. So let me just pause here. I wrote down a couple things. One, my initial response when people do that these days is, oh, I'm not talking about the left. Now, we can talk about them later, but right now I'm talking about you. Okay, so we'll start there. Second, I don't represent the left. I want to be very clear. Just because I oppose the authoritarian dictator's policies doesn't mean you get the right to place me as a liberal. Because I never signed up for that task. Because hear me, I don't want the Jesus message to get hijacked by the left or the right. So don't place me in a camp that I never signed up for. All right? So I'm not here to defend the other side to you. And we're also not talking about the other side. And I'm asking you for reflection, not deflection. So I'm asking you, stop worrying about what the other people are doing. And I'm asking you to go inward and ask yourself, can you reconcile the policies of this administration and the teachings of Jesus? And if you can't, then you need to ask yourself, whom will you serve? Because they do not run parallel together. So you have to start making some decisions. And what's sad, what's heartbreaking, is to watch so many evangelicals that have already made their decisions. And they're going down the path that Jesus says will ultimately lead to destruction. I text my friend Felicia, and I said, Felicia, can you help me with this? And she said something so profound, and we're done. I said, why do you think they all, why would we all, and of course she flipped it and she says, yeah, I hear that a lot. Well, the left or the right, why do we flip? Why do we deflect? And she says this, because anything other than deflecting would draw them too close to the mirror of their own humanity. And they can't touch that suffering and beauty and not begin to question some of what they've co-signed. And so now I realize it. Part of the reason my evangelical MAGA family and people that raised me, part of the reason they refuse to stop and look in a mirror is because they're simply trying to protect themselves. So you deflect because you can't look and realize and feel the heartache that it's possible you've co-signed to something that Jesus wouldn't be within 10 miles of. And that is a hard picture to see. But I'm telling you, friends, healing starts when a whole bunch of evangelicals realize we've co-signed to something that is not what Jesus was about. And so the word for us is to turn, repent, and begin to ask the divine to heal us, and then work towards the healing of the relationships around us.